Hi. This is a sequel to I Kissed My Grumpy Neighbor. I would recommend you listen to that first. Link is in the description box. After that night. An Loon romance story. Chapter 1. Mia. I stood frozen outside my flat door, grocery bags cutting into my palms, staring at the man who had just emerged from the flat across from mine. The man I'd been avoiding for 21 days. The man whose bed I'd left without saying goodbye. Daniel stopped mid-step, his key still in his hand. Our eyes met, and I could swear the air between us crackled. He looked different somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing him differently now. Now that I knew what those hands felt like on my skin. Now that I'd heard my name on his lips in the dark. The memory sent heat flooding through me, and I hated how my body responded to just the sight of him. Mia. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. Daniel. I managed to keep my tone neutral, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. He took a step toward me, then seemed to think better of it. His jaw tightened, that familiar tension I'd watched smooth away in sleep. You left. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. The locksmith came, I said, as if that explained everything. As if that justified slipping away like a thief. Leaving nothing but a pathetic note behind. You could have woken me. My fingers tightened on the grocery bags. We agreed. One night. Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or anger. The silence stretched between us, heavy with tension. I should go inside, I thought. I should end this conversation before it goes somewhere dangerous. Before I admit that I've spent the last 3 weeks replaying every moment of that night. That he has played the starring role in all my dreams since that night. I have to go, I said instead. My ice cream's melting. It was a stupid excuse, but he let me take it. He stepped back, his expression shuddering closed, becoming that familiar grumpy mask I'd known for weeks before everything changed. Right. Wouldn't want that. I fumbled with my keys, hyper-aware of him still standing there, watching. The lock finally gave, and I pushed inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. Only then did I let myself breathe. Only then did I let myself feel the full weight of what I'd just done. I had pushed him away again, when every cell in my body was screaming at me to pull him close. I set the groceries down with shaking hands and pressed my back against the door, squeezing my eyes shut. It was better this way. Safer. One night was all we'd agreed to. So why did it feel like I'd left half of myself in his apartment that morning? I woke to a loud knock. I stumbled to the door, unlocked it and swung it open. Daniel. I breathed. What are you doing here? Couldn't sleep. He growled. His eyes traveled over me. And I became acutely aware that I was wearing nothing but an oversized t-shirt and sleep shorts. The air between us felt charged. Dangerous. I shouldn't be here, Daniel said, his rough voice igniting wonderful things within me. Tell me to go away, Mia. I didn't say a word. Because if I don't leave right now, Daniel continued, his voice dropping lower, rougher, I'm going to do something we both might regret. My pulse jumped. Like what? He took a step closer. And suddenly he was right there. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. Could smell the clean scent of him mixed something darker, more primal. Like coming inside and continuing what we started 3 weeks ago. My breath caught. His hand came up to cup my jaw. Thumb brushing over my lower lip. I've spent 3 weeks trying to forget the taste of you. Trying to convince myself that one night was enough. But it wasn't, Mia. It wasn't even close. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him. Reminded us both. That this was a bad idea. That we were neighbors. That things were already awkward. Sleeping together again would only complicate things further. But then his thumb pressed against my lip. And I opened for him without thinking. Drawing it into my mouth. His eyes darkened. And a low growl rumbled in his chest. Tell me to stop, he murmured, Tell me you don't want this. I released his thumb with a soft pop. I can't. Can't tell me to stop? Or can't tell me you don't want this? Both. Something snapped in him, or maybe in both of us. His mouth crashed against mine, hungry and demanding, and I melted into him. His hands gripped my hips, pulling me flush against him, and I could feel how hard he was through the thin fabric of his sweatpants. The knowledge sent a bolt of heat straight to my core. He walked me backward into my flat, kicking the door shut behind us without breaking the kiss. My back hit the wall, and he pressed against me, one hand sliding up under my shirt to palm my breast. I gasped into his mouth when his thumb found my nipple, already hard and aching for his touch. No bra, he murmured against my lips. He pinched my nipple, sending sparks of pleasure through me. His mouth moved to my neck, teeth grazing the sensitive skin there. His other hand slid down, fingers slipping beneath the waistband of my shorts. I was already wet, already ready for him, and when his fingers found my most sensitive skin, I couldn't hold back the moan that escaped. He gave a low groan of approval. He traced my collarbone with his mouth, and down to my breasts until he found the hard peak of a nipple. My breath hitched in my throat, as his thumb circled my swollen nub, while his fingers worked inside me. I want to taste every inch of you, he whispered. Want to hear you scream my name so loud your neighbors complain. You are my neighbor. Then I guess I'll just have to make you scream louder. He dropped to his knees in front of me, and the sight of him, this grumpy, gorgeous man on his knees, looking up at me with dark, hungry eyes, nearly undid me right there. He hooked his fingers in my shorts and panties, dragging them down my legs. I stepped out of them, and he lifted one of my legs over his shoulder, opening me to him. Beautiful, he murmured, and then his mouth was on me. I cried out, my hands flying to his hair, gripping tight as his tongue worked magic between my legs. I was lost. Daniel, I gasped. Oh God, Daniel, I woke with a gasp, my body arching off the bed, heart pounding, skin flushed and slick with sweat. I was on my bed, alone. The dream clung to me like a second skin, so vivid I could still feel the phantom sensation of Daniel's hands on my body, and his mouth. I pressed my thighs together, trying to ease the ache, but it only made it worse. My body was wound tight, desperate for release, for the touch that had felt so real moments ago. Damn, I whispered into the darkness. The clock on my nightstand read 2:47 a.m. I'd been asleep for less than an hour. I flopped back against the pillows, frustrated and aching, and so turned on I could barely think straight. This was torture. 3 weeks of trying to forget that night, trying to move on, and my subconscious had just served up the most vivid, explicit dream of my life. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to fall back asleep, to forget the dream, to forget that one night. But sleep didn't come. I lay there in the dark, frustrated and wanting, until the first light of dawn crept through my curtains. Chapter 2. Mia. The pub clung to a side street just off the main road. Fairy lights were strung across the low beams, the dust on them proof they had been hung for years. The bartender, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, knew everyone's order before they reached the bar. My co-workers had dragged me there when I finally accepted their invitation to Friday night drinks. I had loved it, despite myself. Tonight, I was wedged into a corner booth with my team from the agency. 5 of us squeezed around a table scarred with decades of pint rings and carved initials. The air smelt of ale and old wood, with a hint of fish and chips. Laughter kept spilling out from our table, too loud, too bright, but no one seemed to mind. Daniel would hate this, I found myself thinking. I'm just saying, Craig was insisting, gesturing with his third pint. If we pitch the biscuit campaign with a dog in a business suit, we're golden. People love dogs in suits. People love dogs, Amara corrected, rolling her eyes. She was the senior creative, sharp-tongued, and perpetually unimpressed. They tolerate suits. Dogs in suits, though, not so sure. Craig, you're obsessed, said Ben, the youngest team member, barely out of university and still eager to please. You pitched a dog for the car insurance ad last month. And it would have worked if you lot had any vision. I laughed despite myself, the sound surprising me. I'd spent the last few weeks feeling like I was performing in my own life. Smiling at the right moments. Nodding along as if I was present. But tonight, with the warmth of the pub soaking into my bones and the easy rhythm of my colleagues' banter, I felt something close to normal. What do you think, Mia? Craig turned to me, eyes bright with alcohol and mischief. You're the fresh perspective. Dogs in suits, yay or nay? I pretended to consider it. Depends. What kind of biscuit? Digestive. Then no. Digestives are serious. You'd need a dog in, like, a barrister's wig. The table erupted. Even Amara cracked a smile. See. Craig crowed. She gets it. The evening unraveled in rounds. Someone ordered crisps. Ben tried to convince us all to do karaoke at the pub down the road and was roundly shouted down. Amara told a story about a disastrous pitch in her early days that had everyone roaring with laughter. Including me. By 10, we were all feeling the buzz, but Craig's words were starting to slur. By 11, he'd knocked over an empty glass reaching for his phone and could barely stand. Right, Amara said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I'm calling you a cab, Craig. No, I'm fine. He waved her off, nearly losing his balance. I'll walk. Fresh air. Good for you. You live in Hackney, Ben pointed out. That's an hour's walk. You'll end up in a canal. Okay, I'll crash on Mia's sofa, Craig announced, as if he'd just solved world hunger. He turned to me with a lopsided grin. You're close, yeah? I'll be fine. I'll be so fine. I sighed. I did live close, about 10 minutes away. And the thought of arguing with drunk Craig, or worse, worrying about him stumbling into traffic, felt like more effort than it was worth. Fine, I said. But you're sleeping on the sofa, and if you're sick on my rug, you're buying me a new one. Deal. You're a saint. An angel. I'm an idiot, I muttered, pulling on my coat. The walk back was cold and quiet. Craig was leaning on me more than I would have liked. After a while he started humming something tuneless under his breath. I got him up the stairs, into my flat, and onto the sofa with a blanket and a pint of water he probably wouldn't drink. You're the best, he mumbled, already half asleep. I locked the door and went to bed, too tired to think about anything except how much my feet hurt. The knock came too early. I surfaced from sleep slowly, my brain thick with fog. Pale morning light seeped through the curtains. The knock came again, sharper this time. I groaned, dragging myself out of bed, still wearing the t-shirt I'd fallen asleep in. I caught sight of myself on the hallway mirror and I looked affright. I didn't care. As I crossed the flat, I heard the shower turn off behind me. Craig must have woken up. Steam drifted into the hallway, warm and damp. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, not sure who to expect. Daniel stood there. My stomach dropped. Chapter 3. Daniel. I had learned to live with silence. After that fateful day, I caught Emily with my then best friend. Silence had become safer than conversation. Walls were easier than windows. I'd built a life around it, controlled and predictable. Then Mia moved in across the hall. At first, she was just an annoyance. Too loud. Too friendly. But somewhere along the way, the banter in the hallway became routine. Almost comfortable. Until that night. One night. That's all it had been. And now everything was wrong. The hallway had turned into a minefield. Every time I heard her door open, my chest tightened. Every time I caught a glimpse of her, she looked away. The easy rhythm we'd found had vanished. So had the eye rolls and the sarcastic comments. The strange neighborly truce we had reached had been replaced by something thick and suffocating. I hated it. I stood in my kitchen, coffee going cold in my hand. This was ridiculous. We were adults. We lived across the hall from each other. We couldn't spend the next year tiptoeing around like teenagers. I just needed to clear the air, acknowledge that it happened, agree to move past it, and get back to normal. Whatever normal had been. I exhaled sharply and set the mug down. Before I could talk myself out of it, I crossed the hallway and knocked. The door opened after a while. Mia stood there in an oversized t-shirt, hair loose and messy, eyes still soft with sleep. She looked surprised, vulnerable. Daniel. Look, I said, keeping my voice even. This is awkward. I know it's awkward. But we live across the hall from each other, and I can't. I exhaled and tried again. I just think we should talk. Clear the air. So we can go back to whatever we were before. She blinked and her mouth shaped an O. Then her bathroom door opened. A man stepped behind Mia, water dripping from his hair, wearing nothing but boxers. Mia, have you got a towel? He called. I can't find. Oh shit. Sorry. My entire body went cold. The air left my lungs in one sharp, silent punch. My vision narrowed. For a moment, I was back there. Standing in my flat 3 years ago. My fiancé's voice behind the bedroom door. My best friend's laugh cutting through the walls. You idiot. I'd done it again. Let someone in. Let myself believe it meant something. Mia turned halfway toward the man, her mouth opening. Craig, I didn't wait to hear the rest. Sorry, I said, my voice sounding flat and dead. I turned and walked back to my flat, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the frame. Inside, I stood in the silence, fists clenched. I'd been right the first time. Walls were safer. Chapter 4. Mia. The hours after Craig left felt like waiting for a verdict. I watched him go just after noon, with a promise to replace my shampoo, and a sheepish wave from the stairwell. The door had barely closed before the silence rushed in to fill the space he'd left behind. I stood in the middle of my flat, still in yesterday's t-shirt, and felt the weight of the morning settle over me like a physical thing. Daniel's face. The way he'd looked at Craig. The way he'd looked at me. The shock. The hurt. The finality. I grabbed my cardigan without thinking and crossed the hallway. Daniel's door stared back at me. I knocked. Then again. Nothing. I leaned my forehead briefly against the wood, exhaled, then straightened and returned to my flat, a hollow ache settling in my chest. The afternoon stretched endlessly. I tried to read, curled on the sofa with a book, but my eyes skimmed the same paragraph over and over. I made tea, but it didn't calm my nerves. All the while, my ears stayed tuned to the hallway. Every sound made me lift my head. Footsteps outside. A door closing somewhere in the building. The lift chiming faintly below. Not Daniel. By early evening, the light had softened, shadows pooling across the floor. I told myself to stop waiting, to let it go. Then I heard voices. My heart jumped violently. I was off the sofa and at the door before I realized I'd moved. I opened it and there was Daniel in the hallway. He wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, her hand curled easily into his elbow. She was beautiful, dark hair falling smoothly over her shoulders, skin flawless, her smile effortless as she looked up at him and said something I couldn't hear. Daniel smiled back. Not the guarded half-smirk he gave strangers. Not the restrained politeness he offered neighbors. A real smile. He glanced toward me. Our eyes met. But he didn't stop. He didn't speak. He turned back to the woman and guided her into his flat. The door closed softly behind them. I stood frozen in my doorway, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I told myself it shouldn't hurt, that I had no claim over him. But as I closed my own door and leaned against it, I couldn't stop the tears that came. Chapter 5. Mia. I couldn't stay in my flat. I couldn't sit on my sofa and imagine what might be happening across the hall. I packed an overnight bag with hands that shook too much for efficiency and left the flat, slamming the door for good measure. The train ride home blurred past in muted colors. I watched my reflection flicker in the window, trying to recognize the woman staring back at me. My parents' house glowed warmly when I pulled up outside, light spilling from the kitchen window the way it always had. The door opened before I could knock. "Mia," my mum said, already wrapping me in a hug. "You didn't call." "I'm sorry, Mum," I said into her shoulder. She shushed me and led me into the house. Dad appeared smiling softly. "You hungry?" "Yes," I said, and realized I was. Dinner was exactly what it always was, comforting and familiar. Food that filled the house with warmth and the air with memories. As I ate, I found myself thinking of Daniel standing at his counter, sleeves pushed up, making me a meal. The way he'd slid a plate toward me without ceremony. The way he'd pretended it wasn't a big deal. It had been a big deal to me. I excused myself early and went upstairs, carrying my bag into my childhood bedroom. Nothing had changed. The same pale walls. The same quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. It was like stepping into a paused version of myself, a girl who hadn't yet learned how quickly things could unravel. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to expel thoughts of Daniel from my mind. Why did this hurt so much? I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I'd been trying not to think about. The tension hadn't started that night. It had been there long before, in the hallway arguments, the lingering looks, the way my body had always been a step ahead of my logic where Daniel was concerned. I'd noticed him before I ever touched him. Felt something before I ever admitted it. The kiss hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been inevitable. And when he'd said one night was all he had to offer, I'd agreed. Even though a little voice in my head told me it wouldn't be enough. I thought I knew what I was doing. After all, I was a sensible woman. But sensible didn't explain the way my chest tightened when I saw him with someone else. It didn't explain why the thought of him laughing with another woman made something inside me crack. I pressed my palm to my chest. This couldn't be love. Love took time. Love took certainty. Love didn't happen in hallways and half-glances and one night that wasn't supposed to matter. Did it? The thought terrified me. Because if this wasn't just bruised pride or misplaced longing, if it was something deeper, then I'd misjudged everything. And worse, I'd walked away from it before giving it a chance. I curled onto my side, pulling the familiar covers up around me. I'd come home for comfort. Instead, I'd brought my confusion with me. What if one night had been enough to change everything? I woke with that familiar ache still lodged in my chest. For a few disorienting seconds, I forgot where I was. Then the pale morning light filtered through the curtains, and the quiet of my parents' house settled around me like a held breath. Safe. Familiar. The hurt hadn't gone anywhere. I dressed slowly and went downstairs, drawn by the smell of coffee and toast. Mum was already in the conservatory, wrapped in her cardigan, morning light pouring in around her. She looked up as I entered and smiled. "Morning," she said. "Morning, Mum," I replied, pouring myself a mug of coffee. We ate in companionable silence for a while, the clink of cutlery and the rustle of leaves outside filling the space. I hadn't realized how much I needed the quiet until I was sitting in it. Eventually, Mum spoke. "Do you want to share what's bothering you?" she asked gently. I hesitated, staring down into my mug. "It's nothing." She raised an eyebrow. I sighed. "I met someone," I said. Her expression softened instantly. "Ah." "It wasn't supposed to matter," I continued. She didn't interrupt. Just waited. Softly I told her about Daniel, not giving too many details since it was Mum. When I was done, she reached across the table and rested her hand over mine. "And how does that make you feel?" "Like I'm 14 again," I admitted. "Overthinking everything. Imagining outcomes before I've even had a conversation." She smiled gently. "Sounds like you care." That truth settled quietly between us. "You can't protect yourself from being hurt by avoiding honesty," she said. "All that does is delay the inevitable." I swallowed. What if I'm wrong? What if I open myself up and he doesn't feel the same? "Then it will hurt," she said simply. "But at least you'll know. And you'll heal." I nodded slowly. If you talk to him, she continued, and he feels the same, wonderful. And if he doesn't, you'll still walk away knowing you were brave enough to speak your truth. The words sank in deeper than anything I'd told myself over the past few weeks. I don't want to regret not trying, I said quietly. Then don't, Mum replied. Have the conversation. The rest of the day passed slowly. I read in the garden and took a long walk around the familiar neighborhood. The hurt didn't disappear, but it softened around the edges. By the time I boarded the last train back to the city, night had settled in, lights blurring past the window like scattered stars. I rested my head against the glass and closed my eyes. On my lap, a bag of prepared meals that Mum had thoughtfully made for me. I didn't know what waited for me across the hallway. But for the first time since everything had unraveled, I knew what I needed to do. Chapter 6. Daniel. The door had barely clicked shut behind us when Sarah spoke. Who is she? I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door a little harder than necessary. Who? The woman across the hall, she said, already toeing off her shoes. I stilled. I know you, Daniel, she added. So don't pretend you don't know who I mean. I shrugged and headed for the kitchen. She's Mia. She's just my neighbor. Sarah followed, arms folded. Then why did she look like she'd just been punched in the stomach? I froze with my back to her. That's not. I exhaled. You're imagining things. I'm really not, she said flatly. Daniel, I saw her face. She was hurt. I turned slowly, irritation flaring. You don't know anything about her. I know what I saw, she shot back. And I saw how you reacted. I didn't bother answering. Sarah softened first. She always did. Talk to me, Danny, she said. What happened? I leaned back against the counter, dragging a hand through my hair. The words stuck in my throat. We slept together, I said finally. Her brows lifted, but she didn't interrupt. It wasn't meant to be anything, I continued. One night. No expectations. I was clear about that. And? She prompted. And she left, I said. Before I woke up. Sarah gave me a look. That's what you wanted, isn't it? My jaw tightened. My sister was blunt as always. I ignored her question. I tried to talk to her earlier this morning. To say we could just be normal again. Be friends. Sarah's gasp was audible. I ignored her and continued. When she opened the door and there was a half-dressed man in her flat. She didn't even explain, I said. Just stood there like I was stupid for expecting anything else. I stopped as a lump filled my throat. The old, familiar ache flared in my chest. Sarah stared at me for a long moment. Did you actually bring me here on purpose? She asked. I frowned. What? Did you want her to see you with a woman? She pressed. No, I said immediately. Of course not. Then why didn't you stop when you saw her? Sarah demanded. Why didn't you say something? I didn't have an answer. She sighed and shook her head. You're being an idiot. That earned her a glare. Excuse me. You, she said firmly, pointing at me, are acting like a sulking teenager instead of a grown man because you're scared to admit you care. I scoffed. I don't care, don't, she cut in. I watched you shut down after Emily. I watched you build these walls and pretend you were fine. And I let it slide because you were hurting. She stepped closer, voice lowering. But don't you dare punish another woman for what your ex did. My chest tightened. That's not fair, I said quietly. No, Sarah agreed. What's not fair is assuming Mia is the same as Emily. I flinched at the name. Emily. The woman I'd planned a life with. The woman who'd cheated on me with the person I trusted most. She lied to me, I said. Both of them did. And that was awful, Sarah said gently. But Mia isn't Emily. And that man this morning? You don't even know who he was. I looked away. How do you explain it then? I asked. Because it looked pretty clear from where I was standing. Sarah didn't hesitate. You ask her. I let out a humorless laugh. After she watched me walk in here holding your hand? Yes, Sarah said. Because if you don't, you're choosing your fear over the truth. I closed my eyes. You're afraid of getting hurt again, she continued. I get that. But right now, all you're doing is hurting both of you. Silence stretched between us. She's the only one who can explain what you saw, Sarah finished. And if you walk away without giving her that chance, that's on you. I nodded slowly. She was right. Sarah's words stayed with me longer than I wanted them to. They followed me through the flat after she left, echoing in the quiet I'd worked so hard to build. Mia isn't Emily. I knew that. I also knew how quickly certainty could turn into betrayal. Emily had loved me once, or at least, she'd said she did. We'd planned a life together. I'd trusted her. Trusted my best friend. Trusted the future we talked about like it was guaranteed. I'd been wrong. The memory sat heavy in my chest, old but not dull. It had taught me things I hadn't wanted to learn. How easily love could fracture, how quickly people could change. Mia wasn't Emily. But I wasn't ready to open my heart again. Not really. I'd built these walls carefully, brick by brick, after everything had fallen apart. Letting Mia chip away at them had been a mistake, a beautiful one, but a mistake all the same. If I stayed close to her, I would hurt her. Not intentionally. Never that. But eventually. Inevitably. I closed my eyes. She deserved someone who could meet her openness without flinching. Someone who didn't calculate risk before every feeling. I wasn't that man. Chapter 7. Mia. I came back to the city just before 8 p.m. The building felt the same, but something in me had shifted. I left my bag by the door of my flat and stood there for a moment, breathing, gathering what little courage I had left. If I didn't do this now, I never would. I crossed the hallway and knocked on Daniel's door. It opened almost immediately. He stood there like he'd been expecting me. Mia, he said, can we talk? I asked. He hesitated for half a second, then stepped aside. Yeah. I followed him in. He gestured toward the sofa, but I stayed standing. I'll go first, I said, before he could speak. He nodded once. The man you saw yesterday morning is Craig. He's a colleague, I said. We went out for drinks with workmates. He drank too much and slept on my sofa. That's all. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. There was nothing between us, I added. And I would never. I'm not that person. Silence stretched between us. I should have explained, I said. But you walked away before I could. And I didn't chase you because I didn't think I had the right. He exhaled slowly. The woman you saw with me was my sister, Sarah. My chest loosened painfully. She was visiting, he continued. I knew how it looked, but I am an idiot. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let you think that. I nodded, absorbing his words. We both fell silent for a moment. But I knew I had to say my piece before I chickened out. I like you, I said quietly. I felt exposed once the words were out there. I didn't mean to, I continued. And I didn't plan for it. But I do. And I'm willing to work at this. At us. If you are. He looked away. I felt my heart break. I'm attracted to you, he eventually forced the words out, like it cost him a lot to admit. I won't pretend otherwise. But Mia. All I can offer is physical. Nothing more. My heart shattered as my throat tightened. Why? He met my gaze then, eyes steady but distant. Because I don't believe in relationships. Or love. Not anymore. The words landed heavy and absolute. I nodded slowly, pulling myself together and straightening my spine. Okay, I said. I turned toward the door before he could see how much it hurt. I wouldn't give him tears. Mia, he said softly. I paused but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he added. I swallowed. Then I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. I walked away with my head held high, refusing to let the ache spill over until I was safely behind my own closed door. Only then did I break down. I could finally admit it to myself. I had fallen in love with my grumpy neighbor. And he didn't love me back. Thank you for choosing Arloon Romance Stories. Mia has walked away. She's choosing herself. And sometimes, walking away isn't the end of a love story, it's the moment it finally begins.